All right, African Kingdom and Central America. Because we've been hoodwinked and bamboozled, we don't know that there was an African kingdom in Central America, the Mosquito Kingdom on the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua and Honduras. And it has a king's list, which also we get into a little bit in this video. So this is one of the countries, places where it is set off at. The people of America has made a complicated subject and one open for great debate. While early migrations are especially debated, it is generally said that a broad phrase of migration involving individual ways of migration into the new world of the Americas between 25,000 and 15,000 years ago. These first arrivals made the most of the Bering Strait and joined the Asia to North American bridge during the recent Ice Age. The Mosquito Coast today forms the eastern and Atlantic border of Nicaragua. The people here are a combination of indigenous natives, possibly related to the Maya, and Afro-Mesquite mix, largely dominant towards the northern of the territory, plus an Afro-Native American and English. The Mesquite royal family itself gradually inbred with African arrivals to produce a line that, by the early 19th century, was almost purely African in ethnic origin. The original Mosquito language itself is still existent, although it exists alongside the Creole, English, and Spanish, the latter which is not a language of officialdom. And their natural territory, traditional territory, stretches from Cape Cimarron in the north, now on the course of Honduras, to the river Rio Grande, El Permata in the south, approximately central on the north on the Nicaraguan coastline. The earliest name of the king of the Mosquito natives along the coast dates around AD 900. With the tradition claiming him as a unifier of local tribes. The first sustained contact with the dominant tribe, or the tribes that became known as the Mosquito Coast, came until 1630, when a Providence Island Company of the British colonies in North America made contact. They established friendly relations with the kings and found bases of 2Ks in the region. The company remained here for decades, between 1631 and 1641. Also aided the son of the Mosquito King and paying royal visits to England during the reign of King Charles I. Afterwards, when this Mosquito prince had returned home and to see his father, he placed the land under English protection. Josephine Henry Tawaski Clarence Robinson is related to the Mosquito royal family on her mother's side, her mother being Gertrude Henry Herbert. The Mosquito followed a matrilineal descent, which was selecting their rulers. Created a reverend in the Moravian Church in 1999, in her works documenting Mosquito history, claims a North African connection with the Mosquito King Oham, Satire 1650 to 1687. Oham's grandfather stated being of the Mosquito Kingdom, a descendant of the Wassa of Egypt. The Wassa is the official title of a minister advisory. From there, indeed, Abulhum, born 1333, spent much of the time in Egypt and adventured as a scholar from Muscat to Ogram Kingdom of Ghana and across North Africa. He's part of the court of Granada and participated in a peace mission with the Christians in 1359. The ship carrying his wife and son Muhammad disappeared and was lost off the Gibraltar coast. The difference is the royal house of Mosquito is descendants of Bilal Muhammad, whose ship must have been blown off course to make landfall on the Mosquito post. If any written proof existed, it was lost when the Nicaraguans destroyed the Mosquito records following an armed takeover of the kingdom in 1894. Another story of this kingdom goes by this. The following integration of shipwrecked Africans near Cape Garasi Adel in 1641, contemporary observers refer to Mosquito-speaking people, mulattoes, and a later term, Sambo mosquitoes, and natives, whom I designate with the mosquito term Tawira or straight hair. British and Spanish authors meticulously recorded the rhetoric duality in their correspondence, yet the mosquitoes are also ascribing their distinction in treaties and letters throughout the colonial period. In 1739, for example, representatives of the two mosquito groups signed one treaty as the Mosquito Nation, both Sambos and Indians, Sambos being in African and black mix. Another in 1780 as the two tribes of Mosquito Indians. In fact, historically sources through the late 19th century, almost without exception, distinguish between the two mosquito groups. Given the persistence of such a record is, surprisingly, the extended scholarship has either been neglected or is stiffly misinterpreted in the nature and effect of the Sambo Tower discord. Overall, the role of the African mixture in mosquito culture has received less attention than the role of European influence. Through studies in the last 2 decades have increasingly taken up this topic. Early historians such as Gamas and Silveira did recognize the visible presence of an African admixture, knowing the colonial documents often known to the Mosquito Zambos, a Spanish word referring to the people of mixed African and Indian heritage. Helms also mentioned African admixture in her ethnologist's motto, arguing that the Mosquito village Mosquito was willing to intermarry with outsiders contribute to their unique ethnic identity, especially the slave ship crash of the Mosquito Coast around 1640. The African mixture was only secondary consideration for these authors. An important advance on the topic of the African influence then occurred in the work of Floyd and Nathan. Even without the revising and perceiving assessments about the influence of the Europeans, both authors added an important element to the discussion of the Mosquito ethnic identity by clarifying that African influence changed how the kingdom was organized, especially explaining that the Mosquito Kingdom was comprised of two distinct groups who based their ethnic identities in association with either African or American Indian descent. Often work then took up the vital task of exploring the implications of this division using infographic sources gathered later in the national period to theorize that the American Indian descent Mosquito was called Cimarron, in the Mesquite language, where the African descent Mosquito was called Sambo. Often showed that the Mosquito Shore became one of the most racially diverse places in the world due to the Mosquito willingness to incorporate African, European, and American Indians into their society, a process intensified by slave raiding, which voluntarily forced thousands to relocate to the Mosquito Coast. Following often recent studies have attempted to incorporate African influence into the analysis of the Mosquito ethic and cultural dynamics. Eugene Barber, a 2007 article, The Complicated Culture, for example, argued that the West African and Mosquito people share a number of affinities, particularly regarding religion, so the contact between the group became led to contemporary rather than conflict. In John K. Thorne's 2017 article, The Zambos and the Transformation of the Zizu Kingdom, then explored the African roots of the Zambos all the way back to the continent, estimating which a region in Africa that was the original generation of the Afro-descendant mosquitoes would likely have come from. Thorne hypothesized that these people were experienced soldiers that was taken in a series of West African wars. On this ground, Thorne suggests that his background may have added to the material prowess of the Zambo faction in later generations. Thorne essays going on to speculate how the military skill of the Zambo faction may have influenced the organization of the Mosquito government, where previous researchers have always assumed there was only one ever Mosquito king at every given time. Thorne hypothesized that during the early decades of the 18th century, there were actually two competing kings, the traditional American Indian king named Barnaby, and the rebel Zambo king named Jeremy. Thorne revision began with the premise that there was this Mosquito Civil War going on to the 1710 and 1720s, which pitted the American Indian king Barnaby and his ally Gummo, Annabelle, against the ambitious Zambo, Thornton. Based on this prison, the Uring 1711 account, which reported that a group of Indians descended on mosquitoes and have moved to a new location because they're offended by the race of mulattoes that have gotten into the government. Thomas also cited an interview in Costa Rica during 1721 when Barnaby and Annabelle refers to the Zambo, Ladinos translated as rebels. None of these sources specified that Barnaby was an American Indian, but Thomas presumed that it was likely the case since this Ladino was presumed to be a Zambo, and because Annabelle was explicitly described as American Indian. Accordingly, Thornton deduced that when the self-described Zambo king named Jeremy wrote to the Jamaican government in 1720, offering to help the English capture slaves, the so-called king was not a traditional American Indian king, Barnaby, but instead a rival king trying to take the throne. Tested against a broader sampling of the ANC documents, CR documents, however, Thornton suggests the revision turns out to be false. The hypothesis since Uring account never referenced any fighting among the Mosquito, instead only saying that a particular group separated from the main body because it did not like the upstarts in the government. Despite this, Thornton's interpretation escalated the rhetoric, saying Uring implied an uprising and civil war. Moreover, interviews with released captives in Costa Rica in 1713 stated unequivocally that Barnaby was not the leader of the American Indian faction. He was, in fact, the king of the Zambos, and he carried a commission from Jamaica with this title. This further corroborated by an interview of a former Mosquito captive in 1722 who confirmed that Barnaby and Annabelle were indeed the ones who was offered to help the English catch slaves in Jamaica. Regarding Atlantos, rebels, Barnaby and Annabelle referenced French and English navajos far more frequently than Zambos. Also, they are more likely that the Lambos were simply freebooters who included some African descent people. Interpreting Lambos as pirates will be consistent with the Costa Rican usage of the term, including in other instances unrelated Mosquito, and ultimately, Thornton's work set up an important precedent for tracing Mosquito culture and political practice all the way back to the African continent. Nonetheless, his hypothesis about the War of Two Kings turned out to be false. So Thornton's work did trace the Mosquito's heritage and culture back to the west coast of Africa. It would be problematic to claim that the books and the diplomatic documents cited here and the direct influence on groups such as Mosquito in terms of their ethnic identity formation. Elite members of these groups, however, such as the Mosquito Kings, educated in Jamaica and Belize, did have an opportunity to counter such written descriptions. What certainties they may have inhabited the coast and did in interpersonal contact with outsiders and interactions they would tend to thrust upon them observation and awareness of the difference and opposition between the groups and others. The development of a more clearly defined identity, in the case of mosquitoes, is observed in the difference between the documents produced nearly a century apart. In 1798, little more than a decade after the English were propelled to evacuate the coast and the Spanish set out to establish their authority there, the Mosquito King George arrived in the settlement of Rio Tinto to complain about his people with the treatment at the hand of their would-be overlord. Accompanied by 45 other Mosquitoes officials and 120 armed men, King George says to the assembly of Spanish officials, "I come to speak for myself and all the chiefs and officials and the people of my nations." Among the complaints was the notary recorded that King George asserted that the Spanish always go around saying that the mosquitoes are fools. They are like asses. They don't know anything and understand anything. All they are saying is talk to them about the English. King George angrily denied this and affirmed Mosquito chief's sophistication by knowing they had traveled to such various locations as England, Jamaica, and Cartagena. Contrasting the written legal structures of other realms of his people, illiteracy, he and Mosquitoes do not know the laws of England, France, Spain, or any other kingdom, but they know their own laws, which consisted of freely living and not interfering with anybody or let anybody interfere with them. They love liberty and dominion of the land which God had gave them by raising them there. Just as he gave other nations what they have and other pastures, King George responded to the Spanish negative stereotypes and a positive contradicting identity for the mosquitoes. By the time Revolts called in a corporation in 1894, mosquitoes were identified more clearly defined with a paper trail to match. The additional framework had been developed and sustained over a preceding half a century, albeit with considerable English support and tutelage. It had been sustained in the development of the black Creoles who migrated from the coast of the British Caribbean islands. As stated in the video earlier, the mosquitoes have a king list that go to 900 AD. On 2009, April, a group of mosquito leaders declared independence for the people from Nicaragua. So they got a movement going on right now in Nicaragua. That's probably why the trouble going on, where these African, Indian, Native American mixtures fighting for their own kingdom, which they had treaties to back up with the Spanish and the British. And even the Spanish and the British said they was African. You know what I'm saying? As I said, the culture was West African. So this was an African kingdom that lasted until about 1896, somewhere around there, 1894, when they had a reformation. And, this is stuff we need to be telling about. We had kingdoms over here that lasted a long time, that fought and did what they had to do. They had the power and the self-interest. So it's not a lot talked about. I'm going to leave a lot of references in the the inbox, description box, so people can look it up themselves and read these papers themselves. Not a lot of history is talked about this, and it's not very well known, So this is some more history that's being posted out. Like the man said, it came from 2017, it's 2018 this year. And he proved that they had a West African culture and a West African heritage. And they was on the kings list, and their kings was there too. African kings, the whole lot. So, this is our history, man. History in a nutshell, They know what we about. They know what we do. But like I said, when it's not being taught and not being to our head that we had kingdoms over here that survived and lived a long time. Matter of fact, they still knocking them down. Look at the stuff that's going on in Honduras and Nicaragua right now. And I bet you see. Hey, subscribe to the video. Much love to the ancestors and much love to y'all. Have a wonderful one. Peace.